I think you want to look at that planoptic array and how that brain is interpreting that as real world data.
Yeah, incredible.
And it's spatial data over time.
Yeah.
Right? I can't help but imagine that there's not an answer there. It might be in light field, it might be in planoptic, but there's not some kind of answer there.
We got to put this in the podcast. Hello and welcome to Boz to the Future. I am Boz, and I'm here today with a guest who honestly needs no introduction, but I'm going to do my best anyways. James Cameron, legendary storyteller, filmmaker. You already knew that. You probably also knew that he's also a famous explorer, in particular of the deep ocean, the bottom of the Marianas Trench, 33 trips to the Titanic. What you may not know, and I didn't know before we had a chance to meet recently, is that he's also a tremendous technologist, not just using technology in his film productions, but also advancing the state of that technology, whether it be submarine exploration or 3D technology. James has been a technology innovator through and through. It's actually the through line, not just thematically in the stories he tells, but also in the way he tells those stories. I do ask every guest to make sure that, is there something in your intro that I should add? What do people not know about you at this point? I mean, you're a pretty prominent figure.
Well, I think people know me as a filmmaker. And some people know me as an explorer and documentarian of, mostly ocean subjects, a couple of other things. We've done some documentaries on a few other things. Probably don't know I'm a farmer.
Yeah, there you go. See, I didn't know that at all. What are you farming?
Well, it's all organic farming, and it's investigative farming, looking at new agronomy around organic systems and organic crop rotations. I just believe the future of food is going to be a big deal, and it might be one of the things that takes us out if we don't really plan ahead. I'm worried about peak phosphorus. Using organic rotations, you keep the nutrients in the soil, you replenish the soil. You don't have to bring in synthetic fertilizers or stuff that's got very, very long supply chains and very high carbon supply chains, things like that.
Now, see, this is why I asked this question, because I did not know that about you, and my family is deep into farming. It's where I grew up on a horse ranch and a vineyard now, but here in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. But it used to be apricots and prunes, as the whole Bay Area was. And then we have a alfalfa ranch, and actually, a small story I'll tell it. My cousin who's working the alfalfa ranch is working on developing a new strain of alfalfa hay for horses that has the right nutrient profile. Mm-hmm. But grows effectively in the soil without needing to add fertilizer.
Exactly.
Which is a hugely, it's costly, and obviously it's running into some limitations.
Alfalfa is a very interesting plant because it's got a very deep root system.
That's right. Yeah.
So most plants, wheat, corn, whatever, they extract their nutrients from the top, 6 or 8 inches of the soil. So you've got to constantly replenish. Alfalfa is going down 40 feet.
Yeah, well,
so it's pulling up what I call paleonutrients from thousands and thousands of years ago. So it's not gonna deplete the soil quickly, and then you can use it in other things. You can put it into green compost and grow vegetables with it, stuff like that.
So welcome to Boz Does Farming. That's my new podcast. It's totally different than what you expected. I love that. This is why I asked the question. And I can't tell you enough how excited I am to have you on the podcast. Obviously relevant to the work that we're doing in technology. But in particular for us, the storytelling piece is really feels like the time has come for it in immersive storytelling.
Yeah.
And in fact, speaking of that, we are doing right here an immersive version of this podcast.
So we're in 3D.
We are. We're in 3D and 3D. Yeah. So for those who want to, they can watch this podcast on their Quest headsets, and we will have that recording up for them. Now, we've recently started doing a partnership with Lightstorm Vision, which is a company that you've developed to really advance the state of three-dimensional storytelling. Tell me about the history there. You've worked so hard on 3D entertainment your entire career.
Yeah.
What motivated you to do that? Why are you so excited about that?
I just always loved 3D movies, and I just thought that it was right at the point where HD was starting to show the promise of replacing films. This would have been in 99, 2000. And I said, film cameras have limited 3D. You know, they wind up these really massive camera systems.
Right, because the film plane just can only get so close together.
Right, and you've got
record.
reels, you know, you've got a feed to take up, and, you know, your magazines are big, and it just all scales up, right? Whereas a digital camera, ultimately, all you need is a lens and a sensor.
Right.
And somehow I intuitively saw that. You know, they still were fairly big. In 99, I went to Sony and I said, I want to build a 3D system. I need you to make the camera smaller. You know, it can be longer, it can be taller, but it needs to be narrower so I can get the two lenses side by side. Because I thought side by side was the answer, and this is a side by side system here. But if we came in to try to do a close up on you or on me, we'd have to be able to shrink that interaxial distance.
That's right.
Eyes.
The sensors can't physically overlap, so you have to have another solution.
And the lenses can't go through each other.
Right.
You know, in CG they can, but not in the real world.
Right.
So then, you know, I thought you could just put them side by side. Eventually I realized that to do proper cinematic 3D, you needed a beam splitter so that you could actually get those lenses to overlap spatially, and using the beam splitter, seeing through one side, bouncing off the other side. And so I went down the rabbit hole of stereoscopic photography, right? And it was right at that jump to digital, and that's what drove it. So all of a sudden it was a wide open field.
Yeah.
With digital cameras, you could do things you could never do with film cameras. I had made a 3D film for Universal called T2 3D that was a fixed base, you know, kind of thing. It was purpose shot just for that attraction.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought, and the cameras were the size of refrigerators.
Right.
So I thought we can do better than that. And what I wanted to do was go out and dive Titanic again, because I'd made the movie a few years earlier. I wanted to take 3D cameras out there and shoot an underwater expedition. And I always think it's great to have a deadline and to have a purpose, not just to make stuff up, you know, because. And so we wound up cracking the code on how to not only create a digital 3D camera, but how to put one in a housing and take it down 12,000.
Yeah, that's really stacking one challenge on top of another.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So now you've got to have you've got to have a pressure sensitive vessel that's able to deal with it.
Absolutely, that's not going to implode and take you out, you know, and then you need a pan tilt so you can operate it, because I didn't want to just poke it through the viewport. I wanted it out there in the water column, able to look straight down, look up that hull, look up, you know, 6 stories up the, you know, this cliff of the Titanic side, things like that. So thinking cinematically. So once again, I mean, the motif and the thing that you pointed out is getting the technology prepared in order to do an artistic thing.
Yeah.
You know, and
Incredible.
that was true with CG. That was true with the 3D. You know, people just accept that digital cinema is the thing, right? There was a point in time in 93, 94, 2003, 2004, where digital cinema was not obvious.
Yeah.
The exhibitors didn't want to spend the money on it.
They already had projectors.
They had projectors. 35 millimeter was really good. And the value proposition to the audience was, you know, I mean, the exhibitor's thinking, okay, I'm going to spend millions of dollars. I'm going to convert to digital projection. And the value proposition to the audience is you get exactly what you got before.
Right.
Except it's digital, you know.
And that's not enough for them to justify the capital expenditure to replace all the cinema.
There was nothing to sell, right? But I saw an opportunity. I got in early with the Texas Instruments guys. There was a guy named Doug Darrow they had developed this chip, this amazing, mirror chip,
mm-hmm.
and which is the heart of all digital cinema to this day, or at least most of it. It's getting replaced by LED systems and so on. But I said, Doug, make sure it's 3D compliant.
That's right.
Make sure that your entire chain, your driver, your server, everything is 3D compliant, because the thing would switch at a really high rate. I can't remember, like 120 hertz, something like that. And I said, we can do multi-flash at that rate, and we can decode using a multi-flash system, right? He said, okay, I'll build it in. And that's what was the catalyst that got digital cinemas out there, was 3D, because they could charge more for the ticket.
Right. So theaters could say, hey, here's a new value prop for you, the customer.
Yeah.
It's 3D, and you got to pay a couple extra bucks.
Right. And the studios were happy, because they had to do a digital cinema print, which they could ship like the day before the film opened, as opposed to 3 weeks of living hell where the labs were working around the clock and prints framing through the bath and coming out wet and going to the theaters.
Right.
You know, most people don't even remember that world, the photochemistry world. So now it's just kind of instantaneous delivery.
I think it's wild, though. I mean, you had told me before that you had the idea for Avatar long before you made the film, and just knew that you just didn't have yet the way to make it the way you wanted.
Yeah, it was kind of a little bit of a chicken and egg proposition, because when I saw what was possible on the Abyss with the single scene that we did in CG, which was the kind of water tentacle, right?
Yeah.
Then I did Terminator 2, and I based the entire story on this adversary who was a liquid metal guy who could shapeshift.
Still one of the all-time greats. I mean,
but it was cool in its day. And Sam Winston, who I worked with, he did the physical part of it. He made the makeups and the gags and all that sort of thing that I could photograph, but I still had 40 shots.
Right.
So that was a lot for us up at
That's a big shot list, yeah.
Right. But Stan and I came out of that saying, we need to do this digitally. So we founded a company called Digital Domain, which was the world's first all-digital VFX company. And our third founding partner said, and we'll put the optical department over here. He used to run ILM. I said, dude, there's no optical department. He said, well, you got to have an optical department. I said, no, that's the whole point. We're going to leapfrog over that. And when we crack the code on digital comp, we're going to be ahead of everybody else, including ILM, which was true for a while. Of course, everybody caught up very quickly. You don't maintain these market advantages very long, but maybe a year, right? And so we cracked the code on how do you do digital image creation, composite animation, all that sort of thing, and do it all under one roof. And that was Digital Domain. So then I thought, all right, how do I kick these guys in the butt to go to the next level?
Yeah.
Right. Creature, character, human-driven performance, right? So I went off and I wrote this little thing called Avatar, and I brought it in and I showed it to everybody. This was in 95. I showed it to everybody and they went, we can't do this.
Right, because this would have been every single shot.
Every single shot.
Yeah.
Every plant, every blade of grass, every insect, every character, close-ups of humanoid characters.
Yeah.
Like, we can't do this. And I said, well, but I mean, if we start now and do our procedural muscle rigs and our image-based facial capture and all that, when can we do it? And they were like, maybe long after we're bankrupt. So I shelved it. I literally just shelved it for 10 years. And then I saw the second Lord of the Rings film, and I saw how far they'd gotten with CG performance-based stuff with the Gollum character. And I said, I think we could do this now.
How cool.
And I was long out of Digital Domain at that time. So we just founded a little group together to explore how to do it. And we went to ILM and we went to Weta and we worked with them to figure out how to do it. But it's like the technology was driven by the desire to tell a story, to see a thing,
Absolutely.
To put on a show, and so we had to create a lot of new technologies for that, including the image-based facial performance head rig system, which is pretty ubiquitous now.
It is today. That's right. Absolutely. And it's funny, we're working on codec avatars, which I've talked to you about before, where we're trying to do hyper-realistic representations of a person's actual appearance based on just cameras or other sensors that are available on the face.
And you're going to train it with that person, right?
That's right. You train it on that person, hopefully not too long, hopefully 30 seconds. You have to say some weird phrases into the lens to get your face to make the right movements.
The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog.
That's the idea. They ask you to do some pretty bizarre things like, duck lips and kissy faces and that kind of thing. Yeah. But it's funny because a lot of the people that we have working on it come from the world, from ILM or from other places where they've been doing this kind of, through motion capture and these kinds of pieces before.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can capture an actor, but the whole point of doing capture is to apply that to a character that is not the actor. Otherwise, just film the actor,
Yeah.
So there's a transform there, and then you have to have an algorithm or a rig for that particular character. And once you get deep into that, you learn how to simulate the surface that would have been deformed by all of those muscle systems.
That's right.
Because you don't actually create the muscle system, you create the effect on the surface skin of the muscle system.
Yeah, so in our model, the codec avatar model, we don't even have a muscle system. There's no musculature, right? It's a model. It's just
a model. It's an AI.
That's right.
Right. So you're skipping
skipping the middle steps. That's right.
This is the crazy thing about where we are right now in the world. We've got 38 years since The Abyss, and The Abyss was one of the first cinematic uses of soft surface, CG. And, after almost 4 decades, it's a very, very mature art form, and it's very controllable and iterative. And then you've got these gen models that are, or even just kind of machine learning models that don't do it that way at all.
Right.
They don't do it that way at all. It's just like, that's all. It's not that it's history. It's just that's not the method. You can go straight to a result that's a condensation of all
Yeah.
everything it's observed
That's right.
up to that point. And meaning it's probably actually trained on a whole bunch of thousands and thousands of faces, and then it just modifies it based on your face.
100%. That's right. Using the common generality that we kind of expect.
Yeah, because we're all human.
We talked about this a little bit before we started refilming, but we talked about how for digital cameras that don't physically exist, you're doing digital cameras, you're designing the rig. You can design these cameras that have properties that are physically impossible.
Yeah.
And you talked about, which I thought was so fascinating, sometimes you want to have the lens flare.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me, these artifacts that initially were unintended consequences,
right,
have become kind of these artifacts that we expect and internalize as evidence that this is a real moment. That this
absolutely, you've gone sort of full circle. So documentaries would always have lots of lens flares because the guy's running around with a 16 millimeter Bolex backstage at a Rolling Stones concert or whatever, can't control the lighting. And then Hollywood filmmaking was perfect.
Right.
Never had a lens flare unless you were doing some, sunset shot and you were being
super
artistic. And then filmmakers wanted to have a sense of verite in their narrative films.
Right.
So they started introducing lens flares. And then that kind of came and went, and different people did. And then we come along and we've got these pristine CG shots that can be perfect. Like you had an assistant always there shading the lens. It's like, no, put a lens flare in that so it feels like photography.
Totally. It's incredible. Actually, this is a good transition to the stuff I have in front of me. I started photography years ago. I'm a huge avid photographer, and maybe 10 years ago, I switched from getting the new modern lenses.
Right.
They're incredibly crisp, clean across the entire field of view.
Yeah.
The geometry is perfect. There's no chromatic aberration.
No barrel distortion.
There's no barrel distortion. No pin cushion. None of it.
Right.
And I now collect vintage glass. I exclusively shoot with lenses that were made 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
I have lenses that have the thorium lenses that have radioactive decay, so they're yellowed, and
right.
And you could fix it by putting ultraviolet light.
Sure.
You'd ruin the value of what that lens is today, because the point is these lenses are imperfect, and that imperfection in the image.
You're just doing the same thing.
It is. It's exactly the same.
What you'd want to do is you'd want to shoot the live action portion of a film with the vintage lens or a lens with some artifact, and then reproduce that artifact in the CG portions, or
right.
see the CG additional portions of a shot, and make it consistent and interpretive. But that's being an artist, right? That's the thing. Computationally, whether it's CG, CG animation, or whether it's a gen model, it can be perfect. But whose version of perfect?
That's right.
You're the artist. You're going to make your version of what you want it to be stylistically, which is why there always has to be an artist in the loop, because there's no sort of arbitrary, kind of Bureau of Standards version of a story, of any story, right? It's always interpretive.
So this is to bring this full circle. This is really such an empowering construct for me, because to think about you as a storyteller, you have a vision in your head of what the story can be, avatar, and then you start working on the technology problems required to achieve that vision. It really is not that different from how I feel our work at Meta is, especially in Rally Labs. When you think about what we're trying to accomplish in our headsets, for example, or in our glasses programs, we have a vision in our heads of how it should be.
Yes.
Like we have a very clear vision of how it should be.
Right.
And what's interesting is the first version's never that. Like the first version is this thing that shoot, and
you run up against the pesky physics.
The physics, yeah, very unyielding. The physics, I would say. I think I've said that on the podcast before, actually. We kind of joke there's the first law of thermodynamics really is a real pain. Like the heat dissipation that we need on the face is just like super.
And you're still dealing with heat dissipation. The more you try to miniaturize it and reduce the form factor and compress more into it, the more your heat dissipation problems go up. But you've got to hit those goals, those milestones, because people don't want a lot of mass on their face.
Totally, that's right. Yeah, and the space is so constrained where the mass. The easiest way to distribute heat is to put a bunch of metal on there, which doesn't help you a huge amount with the massing. So there's a bunch of challenges that we face, but it does feel like we've had a 10-year vision of what we're trying to accomplish, and we're going through these iterations to some degree out in public. It's not a finished product in the way that maybe a story is. It's not a narrative, obviously. That's very different. But it does still feel like we have in our heads a collective set of as a group, as a concept of what we're trying to build towards.
I've been thinking a lot lately about the inception of any project that I ultimately commit to, whether it's an engineering project or an expedition, which pulls along engineering projects with it in order to accomplish those goals, or a movie. It's when I find myself thinking about something that I can't solve for too long,
Yeah.
and then the solution occurs to me, then I have to do it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I need to know if I was right.
Yes.
I can't just imagine stuff and assume it would have worked if I had actually done it. I've got it. Then I'm hooked.
And you have
I have to go do it.
And you have to like infect other people with the same curiosity and problem. Yeah. You have to come pose the question to them and let it burrow into their brains for a bit.
That's right.
And then they're going to come back to you.
Yeah. And so I think of it now, because you don't do anything by yourself. I do complex engineering problems like building a vehicle. So a vehicle is layer upon layer upon layer of electronics and control systems and electromechanical systems, thrusters, whatever, and pressure boundaries and optics and cameras. And it's like basically saying, I'm going to build a jet fighter.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. So you're not going to do it yourself. You need a team. And I find that I somehow managed to pre-select, I guess, with my pitch, people who like hard problems.
Right.
It's a little bit like when Shackleton was populating his expedition team to circumnavigate Antarctica, which failed miserably, but it was actually kind of quite heroic the way he kept everybody alive. His newspaper ad said something like, Antarctic expedition, some danger, survival not guaranteed.
Yeah, incredible.
And it's like, that's how he recruited the guys he wanted.
That's selection bias.
Anybody that was cool with that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The endurance.
Experience required, survival not guaranteed.
That's actually pretty good. We should put that on our posters for Reality Labs.
Just put it on your recruiting form.
That's
you
right.
know what I mean?
No, there's the selection bias required to take on risk, to take on this kind of work.
Exactly.
It's not trivial. I'll tell a little story actually. When Mark, this is how Mark gets me every time. Twice in my career, he's had me make a big switch in what he had me working on.
Yeah.
The first time he had me take on the ads business. The second time he had me take on Reality Labs.
Reality.
And both times he came to me and I said no. He gave me the idea. I said no, and he would just say, "Here's the problem. I want you just to think about it." And like 2 days later, both times, like, all right, I just like once he would plant the seed of what the problem was, and what the space was, and then once I started thinking about it and I could see paths to it, then I had to see if I could do it. Then I had to build it and test it.
And if he had told you the answer and it sounded plausible, it wouldn't have been as interesting.
That's right. No, it was he was just posing the problem to me, and telling there was a sense of what was in the other end. He's like, if you do it, imagine this. But how do we get from here to there was an exercise for the reader.
Right.
And I fell for it hook, line, and sinker both times. He's got a great track record. For us, this is actually super relevant to the work that we're collaborating on. Quest 3, you talked a little about how Golem was this character that you saw that let you know, okay, the technology's gotten to a point where we probably could push this and go all the way.
Push it the next step.
One of the things that's been interesting about our partnership is you have such a high standard for the storytelling that you're doing and how people experience the stories that you tell.
Right.
And so for a long time, it wasn't obvious to you that these HMDs that we were building were going to be a thing that could do it. It seems to me like Quest 3 has convinced you that this is going to be a credible way to experience these rich narrative stories.
Right. The first time I put one on, I saw the quality of the image and the brightness and the dynamic range. And of course I knew like all of these, MR devices have one thing in common, which is that they're creating a discrete left eye, right eye image.
Yeah.
So a lot of the problems that associated with stereo display in theaters, it's automatic, it goes away.
That's right. They're just really solved.
You're not giving one image to everybody and having it decode locally at the face with some form of glass that's dichroic or polarized or shutter or whatever.
And you're getting full brightness to each eye.
Getting full brightness, so you're not knocking out half of the photons with some kind of filtering device, right? So brightness is a big deal in theaters. And the heartbreaking thing for me is, we of course have a perfectly calibrated theater that we work in for our final authoring steps of grading and brightness, color, dynamic range, all that sort of thing. And it looked great.
Yeah,
it was incredible. And we're just so self-congratulatory. Then we go out into the real world and see how 99% of people are seeing it, or 99% of theaters, I should say.
Less than a quarter of the light.
It's less than a quarter of the light, quantifying that. So there's a SMPTE standards, Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. They have a standard for screen brightness. It's 16 foot Lambert's minimum, right? And 3D hits a quarter of that, or less than a quarter of that. 3.5 foot Lamberts is pretty standard out there. So when you lose that amount of brightness, you lose a lot of the perception of dynamic range. Doesn't matter how good your blacks are, if your highlights are only 50 nits above that or some
Right.
stupid thing, right? So it just looks dim and dull, and yeah, we're giving you spatial cinema, but we're taking it away with the other hand, right? So now when I see the HMDs, the new gen,
The new generation ones, yeah.
including
Apple Vision Pro,
including your
Quest 3.
competitor. It's not really a competitor because you've smoked past them with a
Oh, you say it. I didn't say that.
I'm saying it. I'm saying that out loud. It's like, okay, a door opened.
Yeah.
For me, it was like the heavens parted, light shone down. There was an angel choir singing. It's like, this is how people can see the movie the way I created it to be seen, because the scale of the display is subjective.
Right.
If you fill your field of view within the headset and you're converging it out there at a distant plane, you feel like you're in a theater.
Totally.
And,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
you're getting, I was just looking at some Avatar 3 material that we're going to share with some of the execs later this morning, and thinking, wow, this looks great.
Yeah.
This looks at least as good as a Dolby Vision Laser Cinema, which is the Ne Plus Ultra in an actual group theater.
Yeah, and to the podcast listeners, if you want to experience the films the way that they were mastered, Dolby Vision Laser, look for that.
Yeah,
and that's your best chance if you're going out to the cinema to do that.
And IMAX Digital 3D is pretty good, but not in all theaters.
Right.
But Dolby Vision has an absolute sort of rigid standard that they hit, so they're good. They're like you would have QC on every device that goes out.
That's right.
That's how they think, and you've gotten to know them to see that they're serious guys.
They're tremendous technologists, actually, and doing tremendous work. Both, obviously, we think of them in audio historically, but in the video space as well.
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about game-changing technology and immersive technology. I want to talk about AI as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're on the board of Stability AI.
Yeah.
You have such a track record of building the tools required for narrative storytelling at the same time as the technology itself is being developed.
Yeah.
You're diving in to do it again.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how you're thinking about Gen AI and movie making.
Well, in the old days, I would found a company
right
to figure it out. I've learned maybe that's not the best way to do it. So I thought, all right, I'll join the board of a good competitive company that's got a good track record. I mean, so much the Stable Diffusion was open source. But my goal was not necessarily to make a shit pile of money. The goal was to understand the space, right? To understand what's on the minds of the developers. What are they targeting? What's their development cycle? How much resources do you have to throw at it to create a new model that does a purpose-built thing? And my goal was to try to integrate it into a VFX workflow.
Yep.
Right. And it's not just hypothetical. It's we have to. We if we want to continue to see the kinds of movies that I've always loved and that I like to make and that I will go to see, call it Dune 2, something like that, or one of my films, or big FX heavy, CG heavy films, we got to figure out how to cut the cost of that in half.
Totally.
Now, that's not about laying off half the staff at a VFX company. That's about doubling their speed to completion on a given shot.
Right, cutting time in half.
Exactly. So your cadence is faster and your throughput cycle is faster, and artists get to move on and do other cool things and then other cool things, right? That's my sort of vision for that. And the only thing that's come along, I mean, I've been in the CG game for 38 years, right? I've been there at every step up along the way. And, we're in a very, very slow, almost plateaued evolutionary state right now. It's not revolutionary. And then this revolutionary technology comes on, and it's coming at it from a completely different way of generating an image, completely different. And they're really pretty incompatible as it sits right now. The trick is how do you increase that intersection set of those two Venn diagrams?
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And that's what I'm looking at really hard right now.
Yeah, in the previous technologies, film was the point of it. And they went on to have much richer features outside of
Exactly. It spread beyond that.
Game engines and Photoshop and a bunch of these things came out of,
Yep.
but film was the initial target.
That's right.
Whereas that's not the case with Gen AI. The Gen AI film is a target, but it's one of many.
I don't think it's even a big target. I mean, you look at OpenAI, their goal is not to make Gen AI movies. I mean, we're a little wart on their butt, I mean, in terms of the scale, they want to make consumer fun products for 8 billion people,
Totally.
and I'm sure Meta's very much the same.
We do.
Anybody that's striving to get market share in that space, and movies are just a little tiny application, tiny use case, and it's too tiny right now.
Yeah.
That's the problem. So it's going to be smaller, sort of boutique type Gen AI developer groups that I can get the attention of and say, hey, I got a problem here. It's called rotoscope, or it's called,
Right. Yeah.
it's called this, or it's called that. How do I outpaint, upscale, whatever needs to be done in a workflow that already exists that's CG based?
Yeah.
And there are answers.
Yeah. I've heard from more than one filmmaker, like no one thinks that somebody wants to spend their day rotoscoping. Like that is not the way that someone's intending. Like that person could be put to greater purpose.
They want to. They didn't join to do that. They joined to do cool shots.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Not to do the mind-numbing, underwater needlepoint of roto.
Totally. Yeah. No.
And there are a lot of tasks like that, like motion edit. If you're doing performance capture, you capture somebody whose character, it doesn't match their exact anatomy. And then the hand of the character has to be methodically, human in the loop, placed onto the tabletop. The actor's hand was on, but the character's floating 6 inches above it. And you've got to go in and true up everything. And it's all common sense, right? All you have to do is maybe something like feed in a couple of million images of the real world and have a dumb algorithm figure out that the hand should really be on the table.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you and I joked earlier that really your workflow is very LLM-like. Like you're getting a product and giving text prompts to your team.
I'm the living text prompt. You're my artists.
And your artists are a 400-person machine that then affects the reality of the thing.
Right.
And can you give them the same kind of tools one level down?
Exactly.
They can shortcut those.
Why not?
And then you double the throughput.
The thing that I've been thinking about lately, because a lot of the hesitation in Hollywood and entertainment in general are issues of the source material for the training data and who deserves what and copyright protection and all that sort of thing. And I think people are looking at it all wrong. Personally, I think we are all. I'm an artist. Anybody that's an artist, anybody that's a human being, is a model. You're a model already.
Yeah.
You got a 3.5 pound meat computer. You're not carrying all the training data with you. You're creating a model as you go through life to process quickly through that model every new situation that comes on. You don't say, wait a second, I'm going to go back
to the database,
75 million files.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way, right? So we're all models. We're models moving through space and time and reacting based on our training data. So my point is, as a screenwriter, as a filmmaker, if I exactly copy Star Wars, I'll get sued.
That's right.
Right? Actually, I won't even get that far. Everybody will say, hey, it's too much like Star Wars. We're going to get sued.
Right.
And I won't even get the money. And as a screenwriter, you have a kind of built-in ethical filter that says, I know my sources. I know what I liked. I know what I'm emulating. I also know that I have to move it far enough away that it's my own independent creation.
Right.
So I think the whole thing needs to be managed from a legal perspective as at what's the output.
Yeah, that's
not
right.
What's the input. The input, you can't control my input.
Yep.
You can't tell me what to view and what to see and where to go. My input is whatever I choose it to be and whatever has accumulated throughout my life. My output,
that's right.
The script I write should be judged on whether it's too close, too plagiaristic, whatever. And it seems to me everybody's focusing on, because now everybody's seeing the monetization possibilities of libraries and all that sort of thing.
No, I agree with you completely. I think there's a degree to which it slams the door shut on new and innovative things that can come from people who were never going to get the types of budgets that a mature filmmaker gets today.
Exactly.
But they have...
And it's getting worse.
It's getting worse, not getting better.
Yeah.
But they have a great idea.
Yeah.
And of course they were inspired by people who came before them.
Yeah.
And they want to pay homage to that. But it's a new idea. But they can't do it without these tools. They don't have the ability.
I think we should discourage the text prompt that says, in the style of James Cameron, or in the style of Zack Snyder, or in the style of, make up your own style. That makes me a little bit queasy. But on the other hand, it's kind of cool to to have it in the style of as part of a text prompt.
Part of your own. Yeah, I aspire to someday have and in the style of.
Well, I've aspired to be in the style of Ridley Scott, in the style of Stanley Kubrick. It's like that's my text prompt that runs in my head
Right.
as a filmmaker. In the style of George Miller.
Totally.
Wide lens, low, hauling ass, coming up into a tight close-up.
Yeah, incredible.
I want to do that.
Yeah.
I know my influences. Everybody knows their influences, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to me. We talked a little bit. I previously talked to a few folks on the AI and art side of things. I really strongly agree with you. The output is the thing. The output is also, by the way, the monetizable surface.
Yeah.
So the output is the thing that actually has the gravity that you can create liability around.
Yeah.
And I really think that's right. I also I think we overestimate the contribution each of us has to the model.
Yeah.
I think there's we are all taking way more from the collective model than we're contributing to it, even at the most extreme level.
Right.
A lot of these things are shared experiences. They are common experiences among people. This is one of the things, I've talked to Jan LeCun in the program before, where he and I think you agree, Gen AI as it exists today is not the same as AGI.
Yeah.
AGI
Those are chalk and cheese.
is a separate thing.
It's a whole separate thing.
Gen AI is, and one of the things that Gen AI lacks is a world model. It doesn't have any concept of the basics of things, but it can mirror inside of the things it's seen before.
Yeah, it's a stochastic parrot, right? It doesn't know what it's saying, but it can say it.
Yeah, I did read
so
something.
that's a totally different thing from consciousness.
That's right.
It's going to be very interesting how AGI researchers actually are able to quantify consciousness when and if it does emerge.
Yeah.
The Turing test, we're way past that.
Yeah, it turned out not to be.
We blew past that, whatever.
It turned out not to be the test we thought it was.
It's not the test.
Because humans are too easy to fool.
Yeah.
Which we should have known, because you've spent an entire career fooling humans into believing they're someplace else for years.
So there's got to be some other tests, like would you loan it money? There's got to be some other test. Is it can it be a pal? Can it be somebody that you actually can talk to and respect? I mean, I think simulations of friendship have been demonstrated.
Sure.
Right. So how do you know? But you get married and you don't know really everything about the other person. It takes years to learn. We all wear masks. So I'm just wondering how they're actually going to be able to quantify when. And by the way, who's to say it hasn't already emerged?
There's a great book, I Am a Strange Loop, by Douglas Hofstadter, and I think it's probably my favorite treatise on consciousness. And he talks about consciousness being the product of self-referential systems, sufficiently complex self-referential systems.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, he talks about consciousness as not being a 0 to 1 thing. And actually, he uses the example of a human baby is not like a full 1 unconsciousness.
No.
It's something between 0 and 1. And a worm is far less.
Yeah.
But maybe an adult dog is actually a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point it becomes at some point we reach a 1, a human level 1 of consciousness, which is the highest level we know of.
Yeah.
There's no reason to believe there isn't levels above that.
Oh, I'm sure there are. Right?
There isn't.
I mean, I think any Zen Buddhist would tell you there are levels above that. That there's the mired in the daily existence level of consciousness, and then there's the spiritual level of consciousness above that, and probably levels above that.
Yeah.
So who are we to judge? That's going to be the interest. I mean, we have a thing with animals called the mirror test.
Right. Sure.
Only certain animals can pass.
Yeah, chimpanzees,
chimps, dolphins. There's a parrot species
the African gray
in New Zealand.
Oh, no.
In New Zealand that passes the mirror test.
For those who don't know, the mirror test, we put a mark on the animal and show them a mirror, and if they realize the mark is on them, we assign them a certain level of intelligence.
Right.
Most animals think that it's a different animal that they're looking at, so they don't realize the mark is on them.
A dog doesn't pass.
No. Interestingly
enough, when we think of dogs as being, reasonably smart, socially complex, cats don't pass.
Yeah.
But a dolphin does. We don't know much. I think they've found out that a beluga does.
Mm-hmm.
So we can assume some of the other whales do. I don't know if they know about orca. But it's pretty.
They're probably too scared to test.
Right. Elephants.
Yeah.
Right. And so what's our mirror test for AGI?
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm sure philosophers and computer scientists are talking about this all the time.
yeah, they are, and I think I don't think we've got a good answer yet. Is the truth of it? And the other thing that was interesting about that book, by the way, thinking about your point about the human brain being a model, and of course, and neural networks were inspired by the human brain. But also, one thing that I thought was interesting about that is he talked about how we each also have models of our spouses and friends in our heads.
So he's talking about mirror neurons, or what is it, theory of mind?
Theory of mind.
Yeah.
It's theory of mind.
Yeah.
And so before I,
Say
text my wife something, I have a concept in my head of like how that's going to play out.
Yeah.
I'm not always right, and I'm constantly getting that. The reinforcement learning is working on that, I would say.
Working.
It's constantly.
Yeah. How long have you been married?
But my wife and I got married in 2012, so that means today's 14, 13, 12. How many?
13
13 years. Thank you. I'm not good at math. The reason I led with the anniversary date actually is because I want people to know I know when I got married.
Yeah.
I'm bad at math. I want to make sure. So that's a good. See, the theory of mind of my wife was active there.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, she might be mad.
She's
She
gonna be
listens to
pissed
this,
that
and I don't know the anniversary.
Right.
So it's important that
So what's
I
the
embarrass
date?
myself mathematically as
the actual date.
September the 8th, 2012. Thank you.
right.
Thank you for checking that. This is good. She'll appreciate this. It's a good test. We're all good. So for us at least.
So that's the Turing marriage test.
That's the marriage test. I passed that one. We're through. Actually, it's all
Barely.
She doesn't listen to my podcast, so we're fine. So for us at least, like these concepts of models is they're new in a little bit of a way. They're new in how we're applying them in the world, but really do have analogs. We have these analogs that that are in our brains that we've been using for a long time. I think that is an interesting way to frame the discussion as it relates to art and artistry. If these models are allowed to accept inspiration, in the way that we're allowed to accept inspiration, but they're still being operated by people for the time being, and as a consequence, that becomes the vehicle that you can use to say, here's how we know when a story is too close. We know it, that the old Supreme Court test says when we see it, when it's done.
Yeah.
At the end of it.
Exactly. And I can imagine that you can, because these models have access to so much media that's just out there, and there's no reason why they shouldn't have access to it. You could actually build a filter into the model that says, I can't do a lightsaber battle on Tatooine.
Right. Yeah, I know that.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
You're literally, the guardrail could be built in. Why don't you, do something slightly different?
Well, this is so timely actually that you say this, because right now, one of the funny things that happens when you, for example, use ChatGPT's news release to generate an image. I had a picture of my wife at Disneyland, and she had a little baby Groot on her shoulder, and so cute, and which she had purchased there. And then I took a picture of it and I uploaded it to OpenAI, and I was like, "Hey, can you do this as a painting?" And it was doing it, and I could see it rendering it. And then when it got to Groot, it just shut off.
Yeah,
because it knows I'm not supposed to put out images.
Oh, interesting. So they're already doing that
of protected IP.
Yeah,
but it was fascinating. I could basically see the thought process of the thing.
Yeah.
And it was a
because
separate
it
process.
wasn't painting the way a human would.
No,
it was basically just doing a scan.
That's right, because they're doing
a raster.
They're doing a true, to their credit, they're doing a truly tokenized image generator. And so as it's tokenizing and going through, and then it recognized Groot, it's like, wait a second, I shouldn't be doing this. So it was very much that thing.
Cool.
I got to ask about this because it's so timely. In the last week, there's this big trend of people putting photos up and then rendering them in the style of Studio Ghibli. And and you just said earlier, hey, maybe in the style of should be discouraged. And on one hand, these styles have substance and meaning that supersedes even the author. Like they've taken on a meaning to the audience.
I think I would take it to the next level. Is how is Studio Ghibli harmed by fan art?
Yeah,
totally. We had fan art forever. Totally. I mean, people would put fan art on a van back in the 70s. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, you can't stop fan art. You don't want to stop fan art. It's an expression. It's them echoing back something that they responded to, and it makes them feel participatory in that universe and so on. These things should be encouraged. It's if somebody goes out and tries to make money off it in a way that harms Studio Ghibli, and that was provable.
That's right.
Then that's I think where you have to draw the line.
Yeah. So it's not just it's output and also the intent of the output.
Exactly.
If it's like, hey, I'm a huge fan and I want to see, I want to express my fandom through that relationship. That seems pretty harmless, maybe even good, possibly in terms of building the visibility.
Exactly.
But if I'm putting out a commercial effort, that's probably too far.
Exactly.
Yeah, that checks. All right, I want to talk about.
How is that any different than selling a T-shirt, and on the T-shirt is an image of
Yeah.
of Luke Skywalker? You can't do that. LucasArts can do that. You can't do that. That's piracy. It's going to get shut down.
Right.
On the other hand, if you just wanted to wear one
Yeah,
that
totally.
expressed your fandom, for Star Wars, you're not harming anything.
Yeah, totally. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think there's an analogy there we can use. I want to talk about ocean conservation as well.
Yeah.
Because so we had a conversation earlier today, which I found super fascinating. I want to kind of call you back to that, which was the forefront of ocean exploration. You had two great answers to it, and I would love to, if you don't mind sharing with the podcast.
Yeah.
What do you think is the forefront of ocean exploration that we still have yet to cross?
Any kind of ocean exploration, look, you can explore down to about 100 feet if you can hold your breath really well. So any real exploration is going to be done by machines, probably machines that you're not in. Although I do think there's an absolute role for human-occupied vehicles going down there, but it has to do more with public relations for the ocean.
Sure.
You can definitely. ROVs and AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles, are real force expanders for science, for institutional science. But if you go yourself, you will get a lot more interest, and you can spread the word around conservation, and you share the scientific excitement of discovery with other people more effectively. So I think you need to leave room for both. The areas we haven't explored are shrunk down to about the size of the continental United States. If you aggregated all of the different hadal trenches, they call, your different depth ranges are abyssal, and then below abyssal is hadal.
Wow.
That's anything below 6,000 meters that can go all the way down to almost 11,000 meters at the deepest point in the Challenger Deep. Been there, got the T-shirt.
Yeah, good flex.
Yeah, but that's like dropping into the middle of Montana at night with a flashlight,
right,
staying for 3 hours and saying you've explored Montana.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's so much not only in that trench system, but in all of the other trench systems around the world. There's not a lot of big stuff down there. There aren't monsters. There aren't giant squid. What you find is very small but very uniquely adapted life forms.
Yeah.
You take a soil sample anywhere in one of those, and you're going to find many, many new genomes of bacteria and other very small animals.
Incredible.
And so you literally can't go on an expedition like that and not discover new species. It's just not possible. So that's an area of exploration. An area of conservation is we need to be looking very closely at the twilight zone. So that's the area, that's the volume immediately below the photic zone. So the sunlight goes down 300 to maybe 600 to 1,000 feet, depending on how clear the water is. And then below that, you have a zone that's filled with an enormous biomass. It's mostly small critters, but there's some larger ones, so like an oarfish that can be 70 feet long,
sure,
or Architeuthis, the big squids. It's the biggest biomass migration on Earth, and it happens every single day. And it's literally gigatons of animal mass moving up and down with the diurnal cycle.
So as the sun comes up, they're moving up, they're getting nutrients.
Right. What it is the photosynthesizers just kind of stay there. The animals drop down in sunlight because they'll eat each other, and they don't want to get eaten, and then they'll come up at night where they have darkness, and then they can graze,
eat the photosynthesizers.
Phytoplankton.
I got you.
Right? Yeah. And so that's an area that we need to conserve, or volume that we need to conserve. We need to know more about it, because we know not really very much. And now the big commercial fishing fleets are starting to go deeper and deeper, and starting to essentially harvest the twilight zone. And it's a big part of the carbon pump of the planet, right? They're pulling, as they go up, photosynthesis pulls CO2 out of the atmosphere.
Right.
The animals eat the plants. The animals sequester carbon. They go down. They die. They sink to the bottom. It goes out of our current
atmosphere.
Atmosphere, and for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So we need to understand that. We also need to conserve it and protect it. People aren't talking about this. They're not thinking about it. And, the new administration is slashing budgets for any kind of underwater conservation or investigation. And we just need to be aware that, it's just one of those other factors of spinning the cylinder and pulling the trigger, that we're doing in a lot of different fronts.
And one of the things that you talked about as well was how little we understood the ocean as an ecosystem
Yes.
relative to, for example, the atmosphere.
Sure, the atmosphere you can monitor directly. You've got satellites, that are looking in real time, and then you've got AI analytics and so on, and you can predict what it's going to do next. We don't have anything like that in the ocean. We have second by second time series studies of the atmosphere all around the world. We have maybe decade by decade time series studies in a few spots around the world in the ocean.
Incredible.
And the ocean's not just 2/3 of the area of the planet, but it's 7 miles deep in places, and an average of about 2.5 or 3 miles deep everywhere.
And the majority of the animal life.
Yeah,
exactly. And living matter.
Majority of the species count, and certainly a vast majority of the biomass.
Yeah.
Right, and it's a food supply for us as well, and we don't understand it nearly as well as we should, and we're underfunded in that relative to space exploration enormously. I mean, I like space exploration too; I love it.
Yeah,
but we just need to. It's not either or. It's not a zero sum. We just need to spend the money, and the money would be best spent, according to the scientists, on robotics, cheap, mass-produced robotics that can go into that volume.
Like a swarm.
Yeah, swarm robotics, smart, onboard AI that can identify things and sense and come up and report. Because you got to go to the surface to report. You can't send data from a mile down or even 100 feet down. You got to surface and report.
That's right. Yeah. So they've got to have an ability, and we've got to figure out, are they solar powered? What's the story? They might be
motile. They
might have to join the. They might have to counter commute on the Twilight Zone biomass.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah. They're going down as it's going up. Okay, I want to do one last thing on science fiction. What are you watching today that you think is great? That's obviously you're watching Avatar 3. I'm sure you think that's great.
I'm seeing a lot more of Avatar 3 than is probably healthy, and I've got a lot less time.
But outside of your,
look, I'm probably a little out of date. I haven't seen the new episodes of Severance. Good. I enjoyed Fallout. I enjoyed The Last of Us a lot, and I think post-apocalyptic, zombie stuff falls into a niche of science fiction.
That's right.
I like any post-apocalyptic short story. Always had a fondness for that. I think some of the peaks in the last few years have been like Westworld and Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both of which were really high bars. The problem is that the two I just cited are getting more and more difficult to produce stuff on that level of production value.
Yeah,
because the streamers were in basically open warfare to buy market share and spending a lot of money getting cinematic values to attract filmmakers and so on. And it's sort of devolving into kind of law and cop and medical procedurals at that point. It's just sort of following the network, 7 stages of death of creativity. And, look, those shows will always exist, but we're getting closed out of the type of films that I like.
Yeah.
A lot of those filmmakers migrated to streaming, and now they're not getting the budgets, and the films aren't getting greenlit for theatrical. That's why I'm hoping that maybe the HMD world that you're about to blow open over the next few years with some of the new devices that you shared with me. Can I talk about that?
No, not yet.
I can't say anything about it except it's going to be very fucking cool.
Well, take it. That's good. We are thrilled. It's I should say, it's such an honor for us, of course, to be working with you. But also, you're pushing us in really tremendously important ways in terms of where the technology needs to go. To your point, maybe we hope to build a bigger audience.
Yeah.
That reinvigorates people's willingness to invest. That's part of what we think we can do here.
Absolutely.
And we also hope that you can tell different types of stories. There's stories that are compelling that people see, and then I do hope that Gen AI makes it cheaper. Faster to tell these stories. Yeah. Because I'm somebody who personally believe in film. I invest in films, little indie things that I just think are cool, and I want to see. I believe in it as an art form. Chris Cox is the same. His wife is a filmmaker. It's so many of us, like so many generations of technologists before us, were inspired by science fiction, both literature and film. And want to see it continue to push the envelope for the next generation of technologists yet to come for our kids. And it's been sad to see a little bit the degree to which it's fallen into these kind of ruts and it's gotten to these different places. I'll add one other thing, which I wanted to talk to you about. You talked about
that a question?
No, not yet. No, that was a comment bridging to a question. One other thing I wanted to ask you about is so much science fiction has skews dystopian, and yours is a little bit of both. Obviously, certainly Terminator is a dystopian version of what could happen with Skynet and AI if we're not careful with AGI. A lesson to all of us in the industry. Avatar is not entirely. Avatar is interesting. You create this world where there is no electromagnet. The electromagnetic forces prevent there from being a technological, feature, and then it's a different kind of a warfare. What do you think drives so much science fiction to be pessimistic? Let's say, is it just more interesting? Because it's not all. Star Trek is optimistic. There's a little bit of optimistic science fiction. Andy Weir's like The Martian, and these pieces are a little bit more optimistic about humanity's ability to overcome.
I accept that argument. The Martian is a bit of an outlier, though, because I think science fiction is enjoyed for its kind of exploration or to some extent prediction, imaginative prediction of how humans and technology and science and our understanding of the universe are going to coexist going forward in ways that don't currently exist, right? How are we going to deal with our machines, our potentially conscious machines? How are we going to deal with new things we find out about the universe?
Yeah, totally.
And how are we going to confront our place in a universe that's almost infinitely vast by our standards? These are all the fascinating questions. They all tend to be a little bit dark themed.
Yeah,
think about it. But it's saying, why does somebody have to die in every murder mystery?
Yeah,
that's kind of like,
otherwise it wouldn't be a good story. Yeah,
yeah.
The story where we integrate technology seamlessly and all get along is not a great story to tell. There's no drama.
There's got to be some conflict. There's got to be some drama. And your level of violence is your level of taste. Either as a filmmaker or as a consumer. But violence and action are the same thing, or the two sides of the same coin. So we all like action, but some people don't like violence. But action and violence are the same freaking thing.
Yeah, totally.
It's the threat, it's the jeopardy, it's what you do about it.
If there's no stakes, then what's the point? There's got to
be stakes.
Yeah,
totally. There's got to be stakes. There's got to be character stakes. Now, character stakes can be survival. They can be relational. Science fiction seems to be a genre that encapsulates a lot of things. You look at Black Mirror, for example, which is anthology series. It jumps around all over the place.
Totally.
It's always science fiction, but it's not always violent. It's not always action. Sometimes it's quite intellectual. It's a really good broad spectrum science fiction show.
Yeah, totally.
I think.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we've done all the questions I had written down. So usually I ask people on the podcast, is there a place that someone should go follow you? I feel a little silly asking if there's a place that should go to follow the developments of. Is it just go see Avatar 3?
Yeah, go see Avatar 3.
Go find yourself a Dolby digital laser cinema and see Avatar 3.
And by the way, follow Meta for the next couple of years.
Thank you. Yep, we're going to work together on a bunch of things.
Yeah, almost everything that I'm doing, it's going to be touch points with what Meta's doing, and because I'm like a 3D guy, and you're the best channel.
Well, we can't wait to work together on it. We're so thrilled. Thank you for listening to those on the audio, the podcast. This is Boz to the Future, and you can listen to this wherever you find podcasts. You can also find me at BozTank on Instagram, on Twitter, on Threads. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see you in the future.
Yeah.
This is the last one. This is so funny to me. This is optimized for the red wavelength.
It's only for
an old CRT. It does all the things, but
it's counterintuitive because you'd expect it to have a kind of blue-green filter.
I thought it would be a chroma thing. Yeah, no, it's not. So you can. They have us like little.
It's got a dichroic coating or something.
Yeah, and this was for CRTs for scientific instruments. They would have had 3 of these.
Oh, I see. Right.
And shooting it at range, and then it reprojected the red, the blue, and the green. And so the sensors were.
So is this in the early 50s?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's kind of funny.
Well, color space is a whole other thing that people are still understanding.
Totally. The first time I learned color theory in college, I totally blew my mind.
Yeah.
You just never thought about it. You're like, oh my gosh, the fact that magenta is not on the electromagnetic wavelength, but it's a product of like us experiencing. It's like, oh my god,
there's subjective color, and then there's sort of color, science color, and then there's subjective color, and how we process it in the brain. But here's something that's mind blowing: the mantis shrimp, can see 10 times the colors that we can.
That's right.
I made that number up, but it's some multiple,
and it can see polarized light, left polarized, vertically polarized, and circularly polarized light.
Yeah, I know. Why? Why does it need all that?
It's the greatest visual system in the world.
No, it's kind of amazing. So there's a visual system that I want to learn more about, which is the dragonfly. So the dragonfly is basically a massive planoptic array.
Right, compound eye. Yeah.
Its eye is whatever 50 times the size of its brain. It's
Right.
processing, right? But based on performance alone, so your major apex predators like a great white or cheetah, lion, anything like that, their typical success rate from the time they commit to an attack, stalk an attack, is about 15 to 20%.
Right.
Dragonfly is 99%.
And they're eating mosquitoes, like they're eating tiny.
They just don't fail.
Yeah.
And they're moving at high speed, so that it's high speed processing. I think you want to look at that planoptic array and how that brain is interpreting that as real world data.
Yeah. Incredible.
And it's spatial data over time.
Yeah.
Right? I can't help but imagine that there's not an answer there. It might be in light field, it might be in planoptic, but there's not some kind of answer there.
We got to put this in the podcast.